So good morning, everyone. Sheila, that was a fantastic exercise icebreaker. I will be stealing that one from now on. Um, so really, I just kind of wanted to follow up. I am a senior business analyst at Servco Pacific Inc. Right now, I basically focus on a new Oracle platform that we have brought in. In previous companies, I have basically led and managed the requirements process for very complex initiatives that we're bringing in, whether it was software or process, along with working on agile projects. So I am familiar with basically gathering, eliciting, and documenting requirements in both a waterfall and Scrum process. I'm also the director of programs and professional development with our local chapter of IIBA, the International Institute of Business Analysis. So if you ever have any questions or you just want to reach out and find out a little more about business analysis, feel free to contact the chapter. We do have a website. If you just go ahead and Google search IIBA Hawaii, you'll find our chapter website with all the contact information there. And we're always more than happy to help and respond to any questions. And during the presentation, if at any point you don't see my screen, you can't hear me, please interrupt me and let me know. And if you have questions, feel free to use the chat. It will be monitored, or feel free to just go ahead and unmute yourself and just interrupt me. Because if you're like me, if I don't ask my question right away, I tend to forget and then it's just lost. So to get started, I was asked to kind of give a presentation about, identifying requirements, problems, and things of that nature. But usually where we get started as a business analyst is really thinking, what are requirements? So there's 3 definitions here that I put down. I don't tend to read word for word on my slides, but if you look at it, you're going to see the definition of a need, definition of a requirement, and a definition of a solution. The requirements are usable representations of a need. So with that, right, whenever you're creating a requirement, it doesn't necessarily need to be this whole long written document. As long as it's a usable representation of that need, whether it's a wireframe, it could just be a picture, a prototype, those are all ways to gather requirements. And then really where you get these requirements, right, that's who is often not addressed a lot of times. As you're young and you're new, you're like, so I know I need to get these bits of information, but who do I go to? Those are your stakeholders, and stakeholders are really anyone impacted by the change that's going to happen, whether it's addressing a problem and opportunity. So your stakeholders could be your SMEs that would have lots of knowledge. It could be an end user, a customer. It could be another developer. It could be a wide range of people that you would want to go ahead and have conversations with to kind of draw out and elicit and collaborate to gather these requirements. Because really what you're trying to do is understand what the needs are for each of these groups, because they could be different, right? And what you want to ensure as you have this core concept model picture here is that you're kind of considering not only the needs itself, but also really here it's the context and solution that I wanted to point out. As we've learned kind of with COVID-19, context can change quickly, which can change a lot of how we do things. So you always want to consider context as you're kind of developing your solutions, as you're looking at building things, because if the context changes in the middle of that, you really want to go back and take a look, right? Am I really addressing the needs at this point? Do I have the right stakeholders? Am I still providing the right value? And when you're looking at value, right, as you're developing your solutions, as you're building, and doing these challenges, building these applications, is the value still there, right? So you always want to make sure that you're creating something that is adding value. So quick pause, any questions? All right, so in the next few slides that are going to be coming up, really what I wanted to talk about is some of the soft skills that you kind of don't learn necessarily oftentimes in school, but are critical when it comes to kind of gathering requirements. And for a business analyst, this is really kind of core to what we do. So we'll go ahead and talk about active listening. We'll cover really how you go ahead and what open-ended questions are. But we're going to first get started kind of with understanding the problem, which is kind of where we would start as a business analyst. So if I was working on a project, an effort, or really kind of trying to figure out how to improve processes, it's really understanding what the problem or opportunity is. And sometimes I'm given all the information up front. Other times I'm given zero information up front. They just say, Dylan, go ahead and work on this project, and there's minimal information. So some of the techniques that I would use, right, to kind of help me understand what that problem is or what the opportunity is that I'm addressing, or really to learn more about the challenge that I maybe want to find a solution for. There's lots of different ways, and here there's just a few of them that I mentioned. The first one I tend to do is document analysis. And what that is, it's just going through whatever documentation is available within the organization. It could be what's on the website itself, to really kind of understand what is already known about either the problem, the opportunity, what has been done in the past can oftentimes be helpful. I mean, it's just getting kind of that broad knowledge. So that way, as you're speaking to your SMEs and other stakeholders, you will share a common language at times. So that way, as they're speaking and talking about their experience, you're not totally out of the loop. Other things that I would tend to do is really look at what that current process is and maybe map that out, because a visual picture often is a whole lot better than writing a big old requirement document. Context diagrams, if you're not familiar with those are really showing oftentimes a process, or could be an application, and it's really just showing all the inputs and outputs to the various stakeholders, and it could be either a person or a system that is being used, and it's an easy way to kind of identify who you may need to reach out to, because as you're doing the context diagram, really what you're looking for is who's going to be interacting with this solution. So if you notice that there may be a person here that is someone you never even thought of that actually needs an output from your solution, you want to go and talk to them to make sure that you understand what their needs are as you're developing. Offline, online research, really what that is, that's, if there is nothing available, sometimes the starting point is going into Google or, whatever search engine, and just going and doing a search, because oftentimes the problems or opportunities that you're going to be addressing will have had someone else do it sometimes, right? So then finding what best practices are, finding out what other information is out there can help you build that repository as you move forward in the process. Any questions? I just want to take a quick pause. So now that you've kind of done your research, you understand a little bit more about what problem you're addressing or the opportunity that's at hand. Now really you may be going and say, I need to go and speak to my stakeholders. It could be, let me talk to the subject matter expert first, just to gather a little more information. What we want to do and ensure that we're doing is, something called active listening, right? And that's really to show that you're engaged and you're effectively facilitating that discussion by really building that understanding and consensus. Because usually when you're speaking to people, it may not be one person, it may be a group. So what you want to do as you're kind of facilitating or working with them is ensure that they know that you're there, you're listening, you're paying attention, right? You're able to provide feedback, you're not judging them. Because really what you want to do as you're listening to people, as they're kind of telling you more information, is really not judge them. Because as soon as you pass that judgment, what could happen is they basically stop sharing with you, because they no longer want to be, because that's the hardest part for a lot of people, is putting themselves out there, saying something that, maybe not everyone agrees with, or maybe is brand new. So you want to ensure that there's no judgment there, that they're in a safe place, and then respond appropriately. So one of the things I do as I facilitate sessions or I'm working with people, it is really paraphrasing And really what I'm going to do is I'm going to be listening to the people, and then I'm just going to basically paraphrase back what I hear to ensure that they know that I'm listening, and then ask for any clarification in, a gentle manner. So that way they know that I've heard them. And that's really what people want to know, is that you hear them. And then you can go back and just have that conversation, because oftentimes when people speak, they may say things that is clear in their head, but it may not be clear to everyone else. So generally my role as a business analyst is to ensure that everyone has that same understanding. So by paraphrasing it back in terminology that may be shared with the group, sometimes helps, because it may be like, so what it may do is draw out more information, or they may go, you know what, that's not exactly what I meant to say. Let me clarify that just a little more. Oh, sorry, everyone.
Dylan, there's one question.
Okay.
Savitha is requesting a little further explanation about context diagram.
Okay, and Savita, you know what? I will get an example. I'll add it to the slide deck, and I'll send it over to Sheila and Thelma to share with everyone. But a context diagram in general, you can think of having a circle in the center of the diagram itself. Here, I got my camera on. So my rough drawing. So you can think of a process here, and then really what you're gonna list is the inputs from here and the outputs from the system itself. So it could be as simple as if you go to a bank, right, and this is a customer, right, they're gonna input their PIN, and this is gonna give them cash. Something as simple as that, and then you do that for everyone, because it's not only, right, the customer that would interact with the ATM, it could be the IT department that would need to maintain it. They would have different, it could be the finance department that would need different inputs from this ATM for whatever it is on their side. Customer service may need to get the records. So it's just a simple diagram that kind of shows at a high level. So it's not detailed at the top level of the context diagram, and you can definitely get into more detailed sub-processes, but it kind of just shows that overall interaction. So you're not trying to go and capture all the databases and things of that nature here, or how the data flow is going. Really all you're trying to catch are these stakeholders. Data flow diagrams are different, very useful, I use them, but a context diagram is just kind of showing all the stakeholders, all the systems that may be interacting with the inputs and outputs. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay. Yeah, it was a good representation. Yeah, thank you.
Yes. And like I tell everyone, pictures tend to work a whole lot better than me writing a novel, because when someone looks at a picture, they can see a lot more than going, hey, can you read my 30-page requirement document? They're like, yeah, I'm good. So I encourage people to, really think about pictures as being, really adequate for requirements at times. All right, let me move this over. So with active listening, really it's that conversation, right? So it's not a one-way. What you're not trying to do is just have somebody tell you all the information at times. Sometimes you need to draw out and really kind of collaborate with your stakeholders. And to do that, some of the best things you can do is ask open-ended questions. Sometimes they're called asking powerful questions. There's lots of different ways. Really open-ended questions. What you want people to do is really elaborate on their answer. It's not going to be a one word. You don't want to ask yes, no questions, because then you may lose that opportunity to kind of dig deeper into really what the needs are. Because oftentimes what we do at first is we may gather and people tell you what they want. If you ask, a lot of closed-ended questions, they'll tell you exactly what they want, but they won't tell you what they need. Because what they need may be different from what they want. Because what people will often do, my experience, right, so it may not be true for everyone, but my experience is they'll often tell me, what they want. They'll give me a solution. They'll say, this is exactly what it needs to do, right? It could be something as simple as, I want this file to be transported, as a batch process at this time. But what they need is for that information to be shared with this outside system. So there may be other ways to do that, but it's digging down and understanding what their needs are, frequency, what kind of data is in there, because maybe an API is better than an FTP at that point. It's really kind of asking those open-ended questions. And here's just some examples. Bridgingthegap.com. I use that site quite a bit. Laura Brandenburg has a lot of good information on business analysis. So really your open-ended questions are your how, what, where, why, when. The one caution that I do have is when you ask why questions is to be gentle when you ask the why questions, because some people can see that as being judgmental when you start asking too many why questions out of context. So it's just being mindful of who you're speaking to and how that question is being phrased. But some of the open-ended questions, that I would ask, and I kind of just had these on a list oftentimes when I go and start up. I could send these out as a survey with a free form text if I didn't have a chance to go and physically meet with people. So open-ended questions definitely can be used in lots of different ways. So how will you use the feature, right? Where would the user access the feature? Because things may be different, whether it's going to be accessed on a laptop versus their phone. When will it be used? Could it have an impact? Who will use the feature, right? Because if I'm looking at designing and I'm only thinking of myself, am I the primary user of this, or is it a different group that would be using it, and what are their needs? So then it's ensuring that you're thinking really from various perspectives as you're trying to gather this information. So understanding who's using the feature may mean you need to go and actually think differently at that point, right? And something as simple as what does the feature need to do? You can't answer with a yes or no. You want them to kind of expand and explain. Does this feature meet the business need and solve the problem we're trying to solve? Right, that one you can ask, and it could end up being a yes, no. So really, with things like that, you really kind of want to ensure that as you're asking, and sometimes you'll ask a question that's a closed question because those are appropriate. But as you're trying to get various perspectives is where you want to kind of bring these open-ended questions out as you're speaking to people or as you're creating a survey. Surveys can happen in lots of different ways, but I always encourage people to have some sort of free form text to allow people to kind of respond fully. Any questions on open-ended questions? And that is the closing. It's a yes, no. All right. So some additional techniques, say you've gone through, you've kind of spoken to people, you started, kind of writing things down, you've captured some of the needs, you kind of understand at a much better level what the problem or opportunity or that challenge is at this point, right? Maybe who your stakeholders are, and you will kind of want to move forward. What are different ways really here of kind of addressing, of documenting these requirements. Not everything needs to be captured in a requirements document, as some of you may be familiar with. I am very familiar because that was basically my job for my first couple of years as a business analyst, was to go and do waterfall requirement documents. That's all I did, right? But there are different ways to kind of capture this information and to get more information. So the first things I kind of want to do is just additional techniques that you can use to kind of elicit out and collaborate to get more information. Workshops. So a requirement workshop is really a structured process. It's a facilitated session where you'd bring in a cross-functional group. So really what you want is all the stakeholders impacted into a single environment, and it can be a virtual session, right? That's facilitated by someone kind of going through and just working through the business requirements and really looking to kind of delve and understand and meet everyone's needs, because an end user need may be different from, a developer's needs or someone that's internal for that system. But just getting a lot more information in a workshop environment. I've done many workshops at my time as an enterprise business analyst, and they can go very well or they can go very poorly, kind of depending on the prep work. Interviews kind of are exactly what it is. It's an interview. You would set up time to kind of speak to people, practicing active listening and asking open-ended questions. Again, with interviews, oftentimes it helps if you understand the perspective the stakeholder may be coming from, along with really what that problem is, or just to have a common language as you're speaking to them. Use cases you'll hear oftentimes, right, to document, and if anyone wants more information, I can definitely provide templates, but use cases are a fantastic tool that a lot of companies use. It may be a little much here, but just to keep in mind. We'll skip over epics and user stories real quick. Customer journey mapping is kind of an advanced technique, but it's really looking at that journey from that customer's perspective and then mapping that out from end to end. Personas are things that you would create, right? So that way you could create multiple personas for users of the application or in a process. So that way, as you're developing, you kind of have something to model it after. So then epics and user stories, that would definitely be a more agile Scrum technique that's used. And that's really a different way of capturing requirements. So instead of creating a requirements document, what would happen is, you know, either the company, the team, possibly the product owner would develop these epics and user stories, and there is a format for them. And they're just capturing as a blank, I want blank so I can, right? So really you're going who, what, and why within that user story, which would then be broken down for that Scrum team to kind of go and work on. So they would need to ask possibly the product owner or SMEs additional information to clarify what that user story is. And prototyping, I would encourage, it could be as simple as drawing a UI on a piece of paper where all the buttons may be or things of that nature, just so you can show things to end users, to SMEs, to get that constant feedback. Or creating a simple prototype. So that way, often, and I'll say this because I read this one time and it kind of held true throughout my career so far, is people don't know what they want until they see what they don't want. So what you don't want to do is go out and build this huge application from end to end, following more of a waterfall process and really kind of building something that the end user said, wait, actually I wanted this and I needed this and this. If you build, prototypes or you build proof of concepts or things of that nature, and it could be as simple as a wireframe at times, it may help kind of elicit out more information, because they'll see that, yes, I did say that I wanted to have this, but what I really meant is I wanted this. So usually the example that you use in a Scrum kind of setting would be, I know I said I wanted a bicycle, but what I really wanted was a motorcycle. They both have two wheels, but one has an engine and one is foot power. I know I originally said bicycle, but in seeing what you delivered, what I really need is a motorcycle at this point. And this is only a handful of techniques. In our BABOK, our business analysis body of knowledge, we generally have about 50 techniques. What I found is most business analysts, we kind of really use, maybe we could have our 5 to 10, our go-to techniques that we keep in our toolkit, but there's lots of different ways to engage at different phases of development and that project life cycle.
Dylan, a couple questions.
Sure.
For me, if you would be so kind as to define SME for people, yes, and the term Scrum.
All right.
And then from Renee, she was saying, I guess she wants maybe an example of customer journey mapping. A brief one, hopefully.
All right. So SME, subject matter experts. So really, your SMEs could be someone that, in our company, it may be someone that works directly with that product and has, really specialized knowledge. But it's a subject matter expert, so we often just use the term SME. Scrum would be a technique. It's a method that would be an agile method of software development is how it kind of got started. So really what that does, it creates a Scrum team that could be centered around a project, a product, lots of different ways to kind of develop these Scrum teams. But really what the Scrum team has is it's a cross-functional team that would have developers, testers, maybe a business analyst, right, working together, and they would basically be focused on whatever that product is. We'll just say they're centered around a product, and who they would work with is a product owner who would kind of own that prioritization of their backlog, which would have the user stories on it. And the Scrum would work in 2 to 4 week sprints. And a sprint would basically go from taking that user story, that requirement, from beginning and delivering a workable product at the end of that 2 week sprint or 4 week sprint.
Okay, thank you.
And then customer journey mapping. I don't have an easy example. It's a pretty big process, but really if you think about the customer journey, so things have changed quite a bit. So that's why I think customer journey mapping has come up a little more. But the supermarket example is kind of the one that is used quite a bit. So if you just think of how that customer kind of goes through that supermarket and the highs and lows they have as they're kind of navigating through it. So as they kind of enter in, there could be a high with anticipation that I'm going to be able to go and get free samples or free food. As they get into the cart, maybe there's no shopping cart, so that could be a low for that company and that customer, right? They get a cart and usually where the lows come for the supermarket example is as they're walking through the fish section, the seafood section, because of the smells. So most companies are sensitive to that. As they progress through, there's a high as they hit the bakery section because everyone loves the smell of fresh bread. And, kind of just maps that journey that a customer would have through that supermarket. And it could be that journey that they would have, through healthcare is another one that is often done. Interacting with the health insurance provider, the hospital, and things of that nature. I can look for examples and send, links if that would be helpful with the customer journey mapping. It is a powerful tool. It does take some time to do, but it can be very helpful to kind of really notate where there may be additional opportunities that can be addressed.
And if I may add one comment, for the HACC event itself, use cases and documentation will be provided to the teams. And the most common requirement gathering process is the open-ended question and the interview process for this type of event. Thank you.
Right. And then we're doing questions. So if there are questions after, feel free to use Slack. I am on Slack, so I can, pretty much give me a day or two, but I'll check it and reply if there is any questions outside of our time here. And just, just in case there's any other questions, are there any other questions right now? If not, thank you, everyone. I appreciate, the opportunity to speak to everyone. So I hope I've, provided a little more information. All right. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Dylan.